Hello guys! Right now, I'm standing in a custom forest in my creative world, because I want to show you how to make custom trees in Minecraft. So without further ado, let's hop over to my test world so we can start making some custom trees. This is my test world. As you can see, it is a huge mess. But the important thing is that I've been working on a bunch of custom tree assets for my world to try to grow profits. This video is going to be split up into 3 parts. How I make my trees using the Axiom mod in creative mode, how you can make trees in survival mode, and then how we can put these assets together in a custom forest. So this is part 1, how I make my trees with the Axiom mod. And for this, we're going to be trying to replicate a silver birch tree. So here are the steps that you should be following if you want to follow along and make your own silver birch tree using the Axiom mod. Step 1, of course, is to download the mod. I'll put a link in the description. Once you have it, you should be able to click the right shift key on your keyboard and open up something that looks like this. Most of these features aren't super important for the moment, there's just a couple that you need to know about, like the paint feature over on the left hand side and the active block feature over on the right hand side. Step 2 is to find your reference. By this I really mean, find out what kind of tree you want to make and try to find some depiction of it in the real world. It can be a picture of the tree itself, it could be a painting or an anatomical drawing, it could be something that someone else has made in Minecraft, or it might even be a tree from your favorite video game, if you're trying to replicate the world of The Witcher 3 or Skyrim. For me though, I'm going to be basing my references off of this book, and specifically this section of the book on silver birches. Now, step 3 is to figure out the mechanics of how we're going to build this tree. The first thing we should probably think about is the palette. So why don't we open up the creative menu, and start taking a look at some of the blocks that are probably going to work well for us. This is the palette that I've decided to go for the trunk and branches of the tree, and for the leaves, I've chosen to use a mixture of birch and acacia. Apart from the palette, this stage is also important for choosing some other really important things, like scale. Now, in real life, silver birches can grow up to about 15 meters tall, but you might not want that for your buildings. If you're building a bunch of farmhouses that are only about 4 to 5 blocks tall, a 15-meter tall tree might look a bit out of place. On the other hand, if you're into doing mega builds where you want to have these huge giant trees, you might want to go more than 15 meters. You might want to stretch it all the way to 30. That big old tree over there is at about 30 meters tall. And the third thing that I want to consider at this stage is the growth conditions for the tree, because this is going to affect the shape of the tree. So for instance, silver birches really like a lot of sunlight. They like loose soil and they like open spaces. What this means in practice is that we want a tree that has leaves on all the sides, and we want it to be pretty well rounded, as if sunlight can hit every angle of the tree. On the other hand, if you want a tree to feel like it's part of a forest, you should probably make it a bit narrower and avoid putting so many leaves around the bottom and the sides. Stick them more at the top. So let's get into building our silver birch itself. Before we do though, I want to show how I usually do it in Axiom. So what I do is I get some lime wool, and I use this for my leaves. I just find it makes it easier to work with the shape before you get in all the leaves themselves. So why don't we start with the base of the tree and work our way up. You'll notice on a lot of old birch trees, this kind of blackened gnarly bit at the bottom. And that's because the roughest, oldest parts of the tree are always going to be near the base, and the newer, more delicate and pretty parts are going to be at the top. So the bottoms of birch trees tend to be really black and gnarled. We now have the trunk and the branch system in place, and now what's left to do is come in with our lime wool and make all of the leaves. You'll notice that silver birches tend to have really droopy leaves, So we're gonna try and gently drape them over the branches. Alright, so we got our leaves in now, and this is the part where Axiom becomes really important. Although you might have already seen that I've been opening up my menu here and switching some of these on and off, like force place and no updates, which are just some useful features for doing builds like this, where you're playing a lot with fences and walls, and you don't really want to be clicking them on and off every 2 seconds. The really important thing though is the ability to come in. Again, we're pressing our right shift here, go into our painter mode, and say that we want to use birch leaves as our active block, and that the block that we want to be masking over, if you see in our tool mask section, is going to be our lime wool. We can click off mask surface because that'll just touch the very tips. We want to touch the whole thing, and go with a big brush like this. And now you can see we have the basics of a silver birch tree. But this isn't the most appealing thing to look at necessarily. It's a bit visually busy, and I feel like we can do a little bit better if we come in here with a bit of a finer touch. So why don't we reverse that change and say that we're going to use a noise painter. I already have a preset, a pretty simple one. It's just a 70-30 mix, and here my 70-30 mix, I think that I want to make it a mix of birch leaves and acacia. So we're going to come in here, again make the radius of the sphere a bit larger, and see what this can give us. Not bad. I think it's already looking better. One thing about birch leaves is that they're pretty airy. There's a lot of empty pixels inside. But the last thing I want to do before I consider this tree complete is come in here with some more fine details. Now typically I'm going to use grass, but you can use whatever you want for this step. You can use ferns, or you can also use mossy cobblestone or glass panes, or even copper. But the point of this is just to try and fill out some of those kind of empty spaces and make things look a little bit leafier and a bit rounder. You'll see that doing this also gives us some pretty notable highlights in the tree. And now what I want to do is see what this tree looks like from just a little bit far away, as these will become opaque. And there we go. I think that is a pretty decent serviceable birch tree. So this is our Axiom tree. And now I want to show you how I would make a similar kind of tree in survival mode. Now survival mode is going to follow a similar process, except we're not going to start with downloading a mod. We're just going to get our reference photo. Again, I'm going to go to the same book, and I want to use a red spruce. Red spruce is a pretty common type of tree around North America. And once we have our photo, we're going to again try to construct a palette out of it. So this is going to be our red spruce palette. And the important thing now for survival mode is to go and collect all these resources. Leaves are pretty easy, pots not so bad, and deep slate is also pretty easy. So I've added a couple things to the palette before we get started, which are some mangrove roots, which always look lovely in spruce trees, and a little bit of gray stained glass paints. So without further ado, let's get to building. I want to pause for just a moment and talk about the red spruce. So the red spruce likes mountainous soil and damp air. It's fine with shade, so you can put a bunch of them in forests, and it'll also naturally hybrid with other types of spruce trees. This is the important part though. A red spruce can grow to 20 meters tall. If you don't want your trees to be 20 meters tall, try to think about scaling them down just a little bit. And again, I want you to keep in mind the scale of what's around you. If you want to make your mountains look really big, put small trees. If you want to make your mountains look really small, put big trees. Alright, so let's hop back into creative. I know that one took a while. We can clear our inventory and see the tree that's left to us. And as you can see, it's not that far in style. All the trees that I do are not necessarily survival friendly in all of their techniques, but I think the core concepts of them, the scale that I build at, the ideas of like mixing leaves and stuff, using slabs instead of walls for your branches, stuff like that is applicable. For the record, I think that slabs work a lot better for branches than walls or fences or fence gates, just because they leave a better silhouette. You can see over there, there's the silhouette of a silver fir, and it has that nice kind of, like, it looks like a dead tree. The branches are sticking up a little bit too much compared to the finished version. But that looks like a dead tree compared to if I had used a bunch of walls and fence gates and stuff, it would kind of just look like a weird jumbly mess. So here you see our two finished trees, and now I want to show you how to actually make a forest, or rather how I make my forest using the Axiom mod. Again, some of the principles in this are going to be applicable to survival. Some of the actual techniques may not be though. For instance, I like to use a lot of assets. So why don't we just pick out a small area here and make a little forest. I think the first thing we're going to want to do is maybe just raise some of the terrain a little bit. So we can go like so. No one likes a flat forest, and if you're going to make a forest on kind of like an angle or a ridge or something, try to make it so that like the center of the forest is where the tallest trees are. I'm going to smooth this over just a little bit so we can get a nicer kind of version. And we can now come in with our tree assets. I think first though, I'd like to put down some boulders. So we can get some tuff, or I know some people like to use clay instead. Just something that really stands out. I think we're going to use tuff for this though. And we can come in here and just make some little boulders like that. I'm going to come in with a layer of moss on top. I think mossy boulders look nice, and it adds a little bit of greenery. There we go. So we have some little boulders in, and we can come in here with our trees. So all the trees that I make, I put them into my clipboard. A clipboard is basically like a Lightmatica blueprint or any other version of copy and pasting. If you're into game development, this is the same thing. I'm just making my game assets and then I'm spreading them. So I like to put some nice big tall trees at the center of this forest. So I'm going to click on my trees. This is just going to give me access to all of my different tree models, and I'd like to put something big and tall right in the center. So why don't we go for an ash tree? We can place this like so, and I think I'd like to make it even a little bit taller. So we can just buff up the base a little bit like that. Now the next step we're going to do is come in with some more big old trees. I'd like to do some more ashes, and this is going to get into some of the important concepts, which is that you want to have patches of really dark areas in your forest. And you're going to want to have areas where things are a little bit lighter and where there's more wildflowers and stuff peeking through. I think that's enough ashes though. Why don't we come in with an elm tree. I'm going to try and use most of the trees that I showcased in the thumbnail. So our English elms here are kind of like oak trees, but they are darker, and we're using the dark oak. But it's a similar kind of shape. You can see I'm trying to use different leaves in order to kind of show a bit of that difference. So these are dark oak leaves, these are oak leaves. And now I think we can come in and do some oak trees, maybe even some pines. The reason I talked about distribution stuff before is because if you care about things like botanical or arboreal accuracy, you might not want to be mixing trees that don't naturally show up together, especially if these trees come from, say, different continents. That might be something that bothers you. It doesn't really bother me too much, although it is something that I think about and that I'm trying to think about more so going forward. There is a willow tree, and I think a good little life hack for the willow trees is that if you have access to mods like this, where you can just really easily change the biome, you can go over to like Biome Painter and just say that you want to have a little spot of pale garden, and then the vines won't be so bright because now they'll have this kind of pale gardeny look to them, and that's how you get like a nice kind of really mellow looking willow tree. So why don't we come back in here and finally put down some oaks. I'm going to put down a big old oak on the edge of the forest here where it's probably getting a lot of light. And then we can come in with some more kind of spindly ones nearer to the center of the forest. If you want to get some easy variation with the Axiom Mod or with any kind of placement, most of what Axiom Mod does is stuff that you can use in-game. So things like changing the biome or even copy-pasting trees. I used to do that with command blocks and with structure blocks before. It's just easier with Axiom, but most of the stuff is stuff that you can do by yourself no matter what kind of tools you have access to, as long as you have access to base game Minecraft. And we're just going to scoot this one down a bit because I don't want it to be sticking out there. There we go. You can see that this one is a little bit dead. And I think now is a good time to talk about tree variation. So I already talked about the fact that you can have trees that are more like foresty trees versus open meadow trees. That's a good tip, but another good one is have trees of different ages. You can have some little kind of baby trees, especially around the edges of your forest where maybe the kind of tree canopy hasn't spread yet and they can still grow up. So this is just a little tree. I'm using mud brick walls for this one, and it's still my oak variety, so you can still see it has kind of like the same lineage. What I was saying though is that you can have different ages of trees and you can also have different healths of trees. So somewhere in here I have some trees that are really kind of sickly looking. I like to use my pale oak logs for that, and I'll show you we can even put in a dead tree right here. So why don't we come in here, and this is my generic dead tree. Snap it to the ground, and there we go. It looks like there's some kind of plague on that tree. And wherever you get areas where there are dead trees and there are fallen trees, you're going to have new types of trees springing up. So this is a great place to put in some of our poplars. So we can come in here and say that maybe after this tree died, we got some new little trees springing up. So we have some tall ones, we have some weird ones. So this is a double. Always nice to have some kind of interesting variations of your trees if you can. This one is using Axiom so I can change the walls, but you could also do this with just some glass panes. And it doesn't look quite as good, but I think from a distance it looks almost identical, honestly. There we go. I'm gonna put in a couple more poplars. Make sure that they're all touching the ground. That's an important aspect of it. And we can come in here with a real small one. Let's say right in there, in that space. Now I have my brightness set all the way up. But if I turn it down, you'll see that there are some areas where it's naturally a little bit more shaded. And a good trick you can use to make your forests look even darker is just to come in with your biome painter and go for dark oak. So I like to come in and around here, I'll just change it all to dark oak, make it look a little bit more shady, a little bit more like you're in like the depths of the forest really. And finally, what you should do is come in with a pass for the underbrush. Now the underbrush is going to be composed of tons of things. Obviously I like to put a lot of grass when I can. So I have a preset, it's called for grass, and I use it for grass. But if we come in here, we can just spread this around, and now we have a nice layer of underbrush. This is my generic grass layer though, and I'd like for a forest to have some ferns, because I think ferns are really nice in forests. There you go, so that's a generic kind of underbrush layer. I think we can also come in and add some types of mushrooms though. So why don't we add in something like that, and maybe some real mushrooms, like so. Crimson fungus doesn't really spread in the overworld, so you can use it without worrying about having mushrooms all over your forest. And we can have these that look like shelf mushrooms. Looks like something growing up the side of the tree. Maybe this is what killed this one. Coming back, we can add in some other nice things into the forest. I want to add in a berry bush, and I'm going to change my tick speed so that we can see what these actually look like when they're a little bit grown up. There we go. In some of our areas where we know that it's a bit lighter in the forest, we can come in with some flowers. So orchids tend to be found in forests and woodlands sometimes. And you can also find poppies in these kinds of areas as well, around like forest edges. So maybe around the edge here, we have some little flowers. And here where there's some space in the birch trees, we'll put in some orchids. Like so. It's mostly done. I think what I want to do now is just add in a couple of bushes and some more ferns. Big ferns like these are best applied in patches. I've found, not in layers. So we can go like so. Now we have some more underbrush. And finally we can come in with some big bushes. These are especially good for blocking out areas where you don't want people to be seeing really. So we can put it here to kind of fill out this area and make sure that people know that this is the edge of the forest. And now finally, when we come back and we take a look, this kind of looks like a real forest. You can see that the trees kind of get taller as you go. We have some areas where there is a bit more variety and areas where it's a bit more monotone. This is kind of a temperate forest, but if we wanted to make it a bit warmer, we could come in with something like a stone pine or a longleaf pine, or things that really thrive in even tropical environments. So you could do the same thing with a kind of jungle style. I built that spruce tree and I'm going to use it for more of a spruce style because I'm thinking of doing a big terraforming project with a bunch of big spruce trees. Now the way that I actually make these trees into assets so that I can make all of the assets that I use for my forest and stuff is to go back into Axiom and I will select everything that I want to capture. So I like to use a box select, try to go as far as you can and just get everything except for the grass down below. We're going to stretch it out to all the corners like so. And once we're sure that everything's in, we can just hit enter. We're going to click copy with, I like to just say entities, but you want to avoid copying with the air. And then you can go Control P. I don't know why my screen always flashes when I do this, but you can just label it something like Birch1. And I mentioned earlier that I have all my tree models, so I like to add tags that I can search them more easily. Now that it's saved, I can easily go into my clipboard, and of course I can search in Birch1, paste it down, and there you go, 2 trees. That is going to do for today, guys, though. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a thing or two. If you have any questions still, please drop them in the comments. We all learn better together when we're asking questions and trying to help each other learn. If you have any suggestions for references to find really good models of trees, you can also drop those in the comments. I'm going to put a link to the Discord underneath this video as well, if you want to join and start talking with the community. And that is going to do it for today, guys. So if you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.